The USS Abraham Lincoln cut through the Pacific waters like a blade through silk, its massive nuclear-powered hull displacing thousands of tons of ocean as it made its way back to Naval Base Kitsap. Seaman recruit Tyler Jennings stood on the hangar deck, his crisp new uniform still stiff with that fresh-from-the-package feel, watching the other sailors move around him with the practiced efficiency of people who actually knew what they were doing. He'd been on the carrier for exactly 3 weeks, fresh out of boot camp, and already he thought he understood how the Navy worked. Tyler came from a family of military officers, his father a decorated Marine colonel, his grandfather an Air Force general, and he carried that legacy like armor, convinced that command was simply in his blood. The other recruits had learned quickly to avoid his condescending lectures about proper military bearing and his constant need to correct anyone he perceived as beneath him. But Tyler wasn't concerned with making friends, he was concerned with making rank, and he figured the fastest way to do that was to demonstrate leadership by pointing out everyone else's failures. As he surveyed the hangar deck with what he imagined was an officer's discerning eye, he noticed an older man in civilian clothes pushing a cleaning cart near the FA-18 Super Hornets that were chained to the deck. The man looked to be in his 60s, maybe 70s, with silver-grey hair cut military short and a weathered face that spoke of too many years under harsh suns. He wore simple grey coveralls with no name tag, no identification, just the kind of anonymous maintenance worker that every military base seemed to have in abundance. Tyler watched him for a moment, noting how slowly the old man moved, how he seemed to take his time with every task, pausing occasionally to rest his hand on his lower back as if it pained him. This was exactly the kind of inefficiency that Tyler's father had always complained about: civilians on military installations who didn't understand urgency, didn't comprehend the mission-critical nature of every single task. The recruit made his way across the hangar deck, his boots clicking authoritatively on the steel surface, weaving between aircraft and equipment with the confidence of someone who had absolutely no idea how dangerous a carrier flight deck could be. He approached the older man who was now methodically wiping down a tool cart, his movements deliberate and unhurried. Tyler cleared his throat loudly, waiting for the civilian to snap to attention, to show some respect for the uniform, but the man simply glanced up with mild grey eyes that seemed almost amused. That look irritated Tyler more than if the old man had ignored him completely. There was something in those eyes, something that suggested the old civilian found Tyler's presence entertaining rather than authoritative, and that was unacceptable. Tyler straightened his spine, puffed out his chest slightly, and prepared to deliver what he imagined would be a motivating speech about efficiency and military standards. But before he could open his mouth, the old man went back to his cleaning, dismissing Tyler without a word, without acknowledgement, as if the young sailor was nothing more than another piece of equipment cluttering up his workspace. That dismissal hit Tyler like a slap, and he felt his face flush with anger and embarrassment. Nobody dismissed him like that, certainly not some elderly janitor who probably couldn't even remember what real military service looked like. Tyler's voice came out louder than he intended, sharp and commanding in a way that made several nearby sailors turn their heads. The words tumbled out in a rush. Accusations about work ethic and efficiency and respect for military operations, each sentence designed to cut, to establish dominance, to put this civilian in his place. Tyler had seen his father dress down subordinates countless times, had watched officers tear apart enlisted personnel for the smallest infractions, and he mimicked that style now, convinced that authority was simply a matter of volume and venom. The old man stopped wiping the cart and turned slowly to face Tyler, his weathered hands still gripping the cleaning rag, his expression unchanged, that same hint of amusement dancing in his grey eyes. Tyler continued his tirade, pointing out how long the man had taken to clean a simple tool cart, how his slow movements were holding up operations, how civilians needed to understand that on a warship every second counted toward mission readiness. Other sailors were definitely watching now, some with wide eyes, others with expressions of horror that Tyler completely misinterpreted as admiration for his leadership skills. The recruit was building momentum, feeding off what he thought was his audience's approval, his voice growing more strident with each passing moment. He demanded to know the civilian supervisor, threatened to file a formal complaint about his work performance, suggested that perhaps someone younger and more motivated should have his position. The hangar deck had gone quiet now except for Tyler's voice echoing off the steel bulkheads, and even the normal background noise of the carrier seemed to have diminished, as if the ship itself was holding its breath. The old man let Tyler finish his entire speech, never interrupting, never protesting, just standing there with that same calm expression, his grey eyes steady and patient. When Tyler finally ran out of steam, when the last accusation had been flung, and the last threat delivered, the old man carefully folded his cleaning rag and set it on the cart. He took a step closer to Tyler, moving with a fluidity that seemed at odds with his earlier slow, careful movements, and suddenly Tyler realized that the old man's stoop had disappeared, that he was standing at full height now, and that height was considerable. The civilian was at least 6'2", with broad shoulders that the loose coveralls had disguised, and up close Tyler could see that the weathered face wasn't just aged, it was scarred, with thin white lines crossing the jaw, and a thicker one running along the temple. The old man's eyes, which Tyler had dismissed as mild and amused, now seemed to pierce straight through him, and Tyler felt a cold wave of uncertainty wash over his earlier confidence. The civilian reached into his coverall pocket slowly, deliberately, and Tyler's hand instinctively moved toward his hip, before he remembered he wasn't armed, wasn't authorized to carry a weapon, was just a seaman recruit who had been on this carrier for less than a month. The old man pulled out a small leather wallet, the kind that held identification cards, and he flipped it open with practiced ease, holding it up at eye level so Tyler could see clearly. The plastic ID card inside had an official Department of Defense seal, a photograph that was definitely the old man but somehow looked different, harder, and a name followed by a rank that made Tyler's blood run cold. Commander Marcus Webb, United States Navy SEAL, retired, with a service record that included 3 decades of classified operations, multiple combat deployments, and security clearances that went so far beyond Tyler's comprehension that the letters and numbers on the ID card might as well have been in a foreign language. But what made Tyler's stomach drop through the deck was the additional designation printed below the rank, a simple alphanumeric code that meant nothing to most people, but everything to those who knew. SEAL Commander 09, one of the original members of DEVGRU, what civilians called SEAL Team 6, a man who had been operating in the darkest corners of the world while Tyler was still learning to tie his shoes. The hangar deck seemed to tilt slightly, or maybe that was just Tyler's sense of reality shifting, recalibrating, trying to process the fact that he had just spent 5 minutes berating a living legend, a man whose operations would never be fully declassified, whose missions had likely saved thousands of lives and changed the course of history in ways that would never make the news. Commander Webb closed the wallet slowly, deliberately, letting Tyler absorb the full weight of his mistake before sliding it back into his coverall pocket. The old man's expression hadn't changed, that same calm amusement still playing around his eyes, but now Tyler understood that the amusement wasn't mockery, it was patience, the kind of patience that came from having faced real enemies, real consequences, real life and death situations where a young recruit's posturing would be laughable if it wasn't so pathetic. Tyler opened his mouth to apologize, to explain, to somehow undo the last 5 minutes of his life, but no words came out. His throat had closed up completely and his face burned with shame so intense it felt like a physical heat. Commander Webb watched him struggle for a moment, then spoke for the first time, his voice low and rough, like gravel tumbling in a steel drum, carrying an authority that didn't need volume to command attention. He didn't raise his voice, didn't repeat Tyler's aggressive tone, didn't lecture or berate or threaten. He simply stated facts in a matter-of-fact way that somehow cut deeper than any shouting could have. He explained that he was on the carrier as part of a security evaluation team, that his civilian clothes and janitor disguise were a standard counterintelligence technique to observe operations without influencing behavior, that Tyler had just failed a basic operational security test by confronting someone without verifying their identity or authority, and that his aggressive behavior toward an unknown individual could have compromised the entire evaluation. Each word landed like a hammer blow, precise and devastating, and Tyler felt his carefully constructed self-image crumbling with each sentence. The commander continued, his tone never changing, never becoming cruel or mocking, just relentlessly factual, pointing out that real leadership wasn't about volume or aggression, that respect was earned through competence and humility, that Tyler's family legacy meant nothing if he couldn't back it up with actual skill and judgment. Other sailors were still watching, But now Tyler saw their expressions clearly, not admiration but pity and second-hand embarrassment, and he realized that everyone on this hangar deck had probably known exactly who the old civilian was, that his disguise had been obvious to anyone who had been on the carrier longer than 3 weeks, and that Tyler had just marked himself as the kind of dangerous fool who spoke before thinking. Commander Webb let the silence stretch out after his assessment, giving Tyler time to fully absorb the magnitude of his failure, and that silence was worse than any punishment could have been. The young recruit stood frozen, his earlier confidence completely evaporated, replaced by a crushing awareness of how badly he had misread the situation, how completely he had embarrassed himself and potentially damaged his nascent career. Tyler's mind raced through the possible consequences, an incident report that would follow him forever, a reputation as a hothead who couldn't control his mouth, maybe even disciplinary action that could delay his advancement, or worse. But the commander surprised him by doing something Tyler never expected. He offered to teach rather than punish, to turn this humiliating moment into an actual learning experience if Tyler was willing to shut up and listen for once in his life. The old SEAL explained that he had been watching Tyler since the recruit came aboard, had observed his interactions with other sailors, had noted the pattern of arrogance and dismissiveness that characterized every conversation Tyler had. Commander Webb said he had seen this type before, young men from military families who confused legacy with competence, who thought that having military relatives meant they understood military service, who believed that leadership was about dominance rather than trust. He told Tyler that the Navy didn't need more officers who ruled through fear and intimidation. It needed leaders who understood that every person on the ship, from the newest seaman to the most senior officer, played a critical role in the mission and deserved respect for their contribution. The commander's words were harsh but not unkind, delivered with the matter-of-fact tone of someone who had trained thousands of warriors and knew exactly how to cut through ego, to reach the potential beneath. He explained that real special operations were the kind that Tyler probably fantasized about during his workouts and downtime, required absolute trust in your team, required the ability to follow orders as well as give them, required humility to admit when you were wrong, and wisdom to learn from every mistake. Tyler listened with his head bowed, unable to meet the commander's eyes, feeling about 2 inches tall but also strangely grateful that this man was taking the time to educate rather than simply destroy him. Commander Webb told Tyler about his own early career, about mistakes he had made, about the mentors who had taken time to correct him rather than ending his career, about the long hard road from cocky young sailor to effective team leader. He described operations where success depended on the quiet competence of support personnel, where mechanics and communications specialists, and yes, even maintenance workers, made the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. The commander explained that the disguise Tyler had seen through so poorly had once helped him identify a security breach on another carrier, where a sailor had confronted him just as Tyler had, but with more sinister motives, and that test had likely prevented a serious intelligence compromise. Every word was a lesson, every example a mirror reflecting Tyler's own behavior back at him, and the young recruit felt something shift inside him, some fundamental understanding that his approach to military service had been completely wrong from the start. Commander Webb reached behind the cleaning cart and pulled out a clipboard that had been hidden there, and Tyler realized with a sinking feeling that this entire encounter had been even more orchestrated than he thought. The clipboard held a standard equipment maintenance checklist, the kind that every sailor learned to fill out in basic training, nothing special or complicated, just routine inspection protocols for hangar deck safety equipment. The commander handed it to Tyler along with a pen and told him he had 30 minutes to complete a full inspection of the fire suppression equipment in this section of the hangar, to document any deficiencies, to verify that all safety protocols were being followed, and to do it without bothering any of the working sailors or disrupting ongoing operations. It was a simple task, the kind that Tyler should have been able to complete easily, given all his talk about efficiency and standards, but there was a catch that the commander made explicitly clear. Tyler had to do this inspection while actually paying attention to the people around him, had to ask questions respectfully when he needed information, had to acknowledge his own limitations, and learn from those who had more experience, and most importantly, he had to complete the task correctly, rather than quickly, because speed without accuracy was worse than useless. In a military environment where mistakes could kill people, the young recruit took the clipboard with shaking hands, nodded his understanding, and started to move away before Commander Webb stopped him with one more instruction. Tyler was to report back to this exact spot in 30 minutes with his completed checklist, and the commander would review his work, and based on that review would decide whether to file an official incident report about their earlier confrontation, or whether to consider the matter a training opportunity that required no further documentation. The implication was clear. Tyler had been given a chance to demonstrate that he could actually learn, could actually change his behavior, could actually become the kind of sailor the Navy needed, rather than the arrogant liability he currently represented. Tyler moved through the hangar deck with a completely different attitude than he had shown earlier, his earlier swagger replaced by careful observation, his quick judgments replaced by thoughtful questions. He approached the first fire suppression station and realized immediately that he didn't actually know the proper inspection protocol for this specific equipment. His boot camp training had covered the basics, but not the carrier-specific procedure. His first instinct was to fake it, to fill out the checklist based on what seemed logical, but Commander Webb's words echoed in his head, and Tyler forced himself to swallow his pride. He found a petty officer, who was supervising some maintenance work nearby, approached respectfully, explained his situation honestly, without making excuses, and asked for guidance. The petty officer looked surprised, clearly having witnessed or heard about Tyler's earlier confrontation, but responded to his respectful request with equally respectful instruction, taking 5 minutes to walk Tyler through the proper inspection sequence and explain the specific things to look for. Tyler thanked him genuinely, noted his name to acknowledge his help in the report, and moved to the next station with new knowledge and growing humility. Each piece of equipment presented new challenges, new opportunities to either fake competence or admit ignorance and learn, and Tyler found himself choosing the harder path of honesty over and over again. As Tyler worked through his inspection, moving from station to station with increasing confidence born from actual learning rather than assumed authority, he began to notice things about the carrier that had been invisible to him before. He saw how the experienced sailors moved with economy and purpose, never rushing but never wasting motion either, their efficiency coming from knowledge rather than speed. He observed the complex choreography of hangar deck operations, how dozens of different tasks were happening simultaneously, without collision or confusion because everyone knew their role and trusted their teammates to know theirs. Tyler watched mechanics troubleshoot an engine problem through collaborative discussion rather than hierarchical command, saw how the most junior airman's observation about an unusual sound led to discovering a potentially serious maintenance issue. He noticed the way experienced personnel taught newer sailors, not through intimidation or mockery, but through patient demonstration and explanation, creating competence through mentorship rather than fear. Each observation chipped away at Tyler's previous worldview, his belief that military effectiveness came from rigid hierarchy and aggressive enforcement of authority, and he began to understand what Commander Webb had been trying to teach him. The inspection itself became secondary to these larger lessons, though Tyler was careful to complete it thoroughly, checking every item on the list, documenting deficiencies accurately, asking questions when he was uncertain rather than guessing. He found himself engaging in actual conversations with other sailors, not lecturing or correcting but listening and learning, discovering that many of them had fascinating backgrounds and impressive skills that his earlier arrogance had prevented him from seeing. A second-class petty officer who Tyler had dismissed as just another enlisted sailor turned out to be a former civilian aerospace engineer who had joined the Navy specifically to work on carrier aircraft. A seaman apprentice who Tyler had barely acknowledged was fluent in 4 languages and had scored in the 99th percentile on every Navy aptitude test. An older chief who Tyler had assumed was just coasting to retirement had 3 combat tours and more flight deck experience than everyone else in the section combined. Tyler realized with growing shame that he had been surrounded by incredibly talented, dedicated people and had been too blind with his own perceived superiority to notice. As his 30 minutes approached their end, Tyler reviewed his completed checklist and realized that he had found several legitimate safety concerns, minor issues that needed attention, nothing critical, but the kind of things that could become critical if ignored. He had documented them clearly, noted who had helped him identify them, and included recommendations for correction based on what he had learned from more experienced personnel. The checklist was thorough, honest and competent in a way that reflected actual work rather than performance, and Tyler felt a small spark of legitimate pride that was entirely different from his earlier arrogance. He made his way back to Commander Webb's position, finding the older man exactly where he had been, still in his civilian coveralls, still appearing to be just another maintenance worker to anyone who didn't know better. Tyler approached with genuine respect this time, positioned himself at a proper respectful distance, and waited to be acknowledged before speaking. Commander Webb took the clipboard from Tyler's hands and reviewed it in silence, his grey eyes scanning each line of the inspection report with the same careful attention Tyler had finally learned to apply to his own work. The minutes stretched out as the commander read, occasionally going back to recheck something, his weathered face giving no indication of what he was thinking, whether Tyler had passed or failed this impromptu test. Tyler stood at attention, not because regulations required it, but because it felt appropriate, the only response he could manage to the tension of waiting for judgment on what might determine his entire naval career. Other sailors continued their work around them, but Tyler noticed several glancing over, clearly curious about how this confrontation would resolve, whether the arrogant recruit would face consequences or redemption. Finally, Commander Webb looked up from the clipboard, his expression still unreadable, and Tyler braced himself for whatever was coming. The old SEAL surprised him again by asking questions instead of rendering judgment, specific questions about the deficiencies Tyler had documented, about how he had identified them, about who had helped him and what he had learned from those interactions. Tyler answered honestly, giving credit to the various sailors who had assisted him, explaining his reasoning for each notation on the checklist, acknowledging the gaps in his knowledge that had required him to seek help. Commander Webb listened to each answer, occasionally nodding, sometimes asking follow-up questions that revealed he already knew the answers, and was testing Tyler's honesty rather than seeking information. The interrogation, because that's what it really was, despite the calm tone, lasted almost as long as the inspection itself had, and Tyler felt his anxiety growing with each question, wondering if he had missed something critical, if some answer had revealed that he still didn't understand the lesson. Then Commander Webb did something unexpected. He smiled, not the amused expression from earlier, but a genuine smile of approval, and Tyler felt a wave of relief so intense it was almost dizzying. The commander told Tyler that his inspection was acceptable, not perfect but thorough and honest, showing real attention to detail and proper acknowledgement of assistance received. More importantly, Webb said, Tyler's behavior during the inspection had demonstrated actual learning, the ability to set aside ego and prioritize mission over pride, which was the fundamental requirement for anyone who wanted to be more than just another uniform taking up space on the ship. The commander explained that he would not be filing an incident report about their earlier confrontation, that he considered the matter resolved through practical demonstration of changed behavior, but he warned Tyler that this was a one-time educational opportunity. If Tyler reverted to his previous arrogant behavior, if he failed to maintain the humility and respect he had shown during the inspection, there would be people watching and there would be consequences that no family legacy could protect him from. Commander Webb handed the clipboard back to Tyler and told him to file the inspection report with the hangar deck safety officer, to follow up on the deficiencies he had identified, to continue learning from the experienced personnel around him, and most important to remember that everyone on the ship from the admiral to the newest recruit was part of the same mission and deserved the same fundamental respect. Tyler walked away from that encounter, fundamentally changed in ways he was still processing, his entire understanding of military service and leadership completely recalibrated by one humbling afternoon. The swagger was gone, replaced not by timidity, but by genuine awareness of how much he didn't know and how much he needed to learn from those around him. He filed his inspection report as instructed, working with the safety officer to ensure the identified deficiencies were addressed, and in the process learned even more about hangar deck operations and the complex coordination required to keep a carrier functioning. Over the following weeks, Tyler became a different kind of sailor, still ambitious and driven, but now channeling that energy into actual competence rather than performative authority. He sought out mentors among the experienced enlisted personnel, asked questions without worrying about looking ignorant, volunteered for additional training, and most importantly treated every person on the ship with the respect their contribution deserved regardless of their rank. Other sailors noticed the change. Some were skeptical at first, assuming it was temporary, But as days turned into weeks and Tyler's new behavior remained consistent, skepticism turned to acceptance and eventually to respect. The arrogant recruit who had berated a janitor became known instead as someone who would show up early to help with maintenance, who would ask thoughtful questions during training, who would acknowledge mistakes openly and learn from them. Tyler never saw Commander Webb again during that deployment. The old SEAL had presumably completed whatever security evaluation he was conducting and moved on to other assignments, other ships, other tests of operational security and human character. But Tyler thought about him constantly, about those calm gray eyes that had seen through his performance to the insecurity beneath, about the patient teaching that had offered growth instead of punishment, about the lesson that real strength came from humility rather than dominance. Months later, when Tyler was finally recommended for promotion and leadership training, his commanding officer told him something that made everything click into place. The officer explained that Tyler's evaluation file contained a confidential recommendation from a senior special operations officer, someone who had observed Tyler's potential for growth and vouched for his character development, and that recommendation had carried significant weight in the promotion decision. Tyler never confirmed it officially. The recommendation was classified and would remain so, but he knew without doubt who had written it, who had seen past the arrogant facade to the potential beneath, who had taken the time to teach rather than simply punish. Commander Webb had given Tyler more than just a lesson in humility. He had given him a chance to become the kind of leader the Navy actually needed, and Tyler was determined to honor that gift by paying it forward. He began mentoring newer recruits himself, not with the aggressive superiority he had once displayed, but with the patient understanding that had been shown to him, recognizing in their mistakes and arrogance the same insecurity he had hidden behind his own bluster. Tyler learned to see people clearly, to value competence over rank, to understand that a cleaning cart pushed by the right person might conceal more wisdom and experience than a dozen dress uniforms, and most importantly, to remember that respect was something you earned through your actions rather than demanded through your authority, and that lesson, taught by an old man in coveralls who turned out to be a legend, became the foundation of everything Tyler accomplished in his naval career and the person he ultimately became.